In the last section, we created our test file and successfully executed a couple of tests inside of it. We did so by using the assert function inside the it block. Assert right here is a very important function. I'm going to say that's a little bit of a piece of magic with Mocha. As soon as Mocha invokes an it statement, if it sees any it statement call the assert function, it will record the value that is returned from assert right here. So definitely very important piece of Mocha. In this section, we're going to continue by writing our first test around creating a user and saving it to the database. For this first test that we're going to write, we're going to take it nice and slow, and then over time, for all the different other tests that we're going to write inside this project, we're going to pick up the pace just a little bit. I'm going to start by first deleting the it statement that I have inside of here. Now, inside of this test file, I probably want to have access to all the code that is written inside of my user file or my user.js inside the source directory, right? Like the whole purpose of this test is to make sure that we can use this user model that we created to save something to our database. So it definitely makes sense that we want to have access to that code inside of this file. To do so, we will first import or require in the user model to this file. So at the very top, I'm going to add in another require statement. I'll say const user equals require, and now we need to pass in a string that's going to get us access to this user file right here. Now you might think to yourself, okay, no problem, let's put user. Unfortunately, that's not quite how require statements work. We need to pass a path to require here that walks us from the current directory that this test file is in to the directory that the user file is in. So to walk over or to give a directory path that's going to get us over to source, we are currently inside the test directory. We need to go up one directory into users. So I'm going to say dot dot slash. Dot dot slash means go up one directory. We're then going to walk into source. So I'm going to put down source, and then I want to specifically require in the user file. So I'll say user, like so. Notice that I don't actually have to specify the .js file extension. I can just say user, and that's it. So now the user variable inside of my test file is equal to the user model that was created when we did our Mongoose call right here. As a reminder, this user model that we have right here represents the entire collection of data that sits inside of our Mongo database. We specifically represent it with a capital U to indicate that this is like a special class of user, like a class object, as much as a class as JavaScript can make. So now that we've imported or required in our user model, we can use it to create a new user inside of our it statement. We will create the user, and then we will save it to the database, and then we will write some amount of code to say, hey, did this thing actually get successfully saved? So we're going to take these three steps one at a time. First, we create a new user, then we save it, and then we somehow write some code to figure out whether or not the user was saved. All right, that's the game plan, the next three steps. The first step, creating a new user, is probably the easiest of the three, so we're definitely lucking out here. We get to do the easy part first. This is definitely one of those places where I'm going to throw a little bit of code on the screen, and then we'll talk about exactly what's going on, okay? So I'm going to create a new variable called Joe. Joe is going to be our user, all right? He's going to be our guy. To create a new user called Joe, I'm going to say new user, and then I'm going to pass in an object with the properties or attributes that I expect Joe to have. Right now, our user model only has a single property assigned to it inside the schema, right? If we go back over to our user file and look at our schema, we're saying right now that a user can only have a name, and that name's got to be a string. So when I create a new user, I'm going to say that he has a name, and I'm going to pass in a string for his name, which in our case is going to be Joe. And that's all it takes to create a new user. We're going to see a lot of different variations on creating models over time. So this is the simplest form that we're going to see. In the future, we'll see a couple other fancy ways as well. One thing I want to be really clear about is that we use the user model, like the user class, to create a new instance of user. So capital U user right here, this represents all models. It's like the overall definition of what a user is. When we use it in combination with the new keyword and assign the result to Joe right here, Joe becomes an instance of a user. So he is, the Joe variable right here represents a very discrete record that we want to eventually save to our database. That last part is really important as well. By creating a new user like this right here, this operation does not automatically save anything to our database. So just making this, nothing saved to the database. We have to explicitly attempt to save Joe to our database in order for us to actually see him appear inside of our Mongo data. So let's take a quick break and we'll come back and figure out how we actually save Joe to our database. And once we figure that out, we'll use our graphical client, RoboMongo, to just verify that our data is successfully being saved into MongoDB. So let's take a quick break and we'll figure that part out.